How's it going, everybody? My name is Trevor from Butterbeer and Bloodbending. On this channel, I hope to bring you guys some great content about both Harry Potter and Avatar, my two favorite series of all time. With this video, I would kind of like to talk about some questions slash nitpicks I have about the first Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher slash Sorcerer's Stone, depending on where you live. Um, I would, I kind of just want to take this series of videos, doing one book at a time and kind of just addressing some questions that I have come across or some problems that I've come across while listening to the audiobooks. Now, I listened to the Stephen Fry version, which is the version from the UK, and it is I think the earlier version, so some of these problems may have been fixed in other later versions of the book. And so if they have been fixed, I apologize, but this is just what I have been able to listen to. That being said, I absolutely love the Harry Potter series. So, if I point out a problem or, ask a question that has not been answered, that's not me saying, oh, like, I wish that these books were better. Like, no, I think they're great. And this is just me, I just thought this would make an interesting video. Because I love the series so much, and I just thought it would be fun just to go through and just talk about some questions that I have with it. And I know people have made videos like these before, so I'm going to try not to bring up big plot holes and big questions because, everyone's heard those. So this is just kind of my little, very small details and questions that I have from the series. Now, there is a wiki page titled Mistakes in the Harry Potter Books, and I looked through this after kind of coming up with my own things, and I kind of went through and made sure that none of my questions and problems that I found lined up with any of these, because I didn't want to, anyone to think that I was just listing things from this wiki. So I will link it in the description below if you want to take a look at it. It's pretty interesting to see what the big problems are that people have found. So I will put that in the description if you want to take a look. On this wiki, J.K. Rowling herself said, or there's a quote from J.K. Rowling that says, "As obsessive fans will tell you, I do slip up. Several classrooms move floors mysteriously between books, and these are the least serious continuity errors. Most of the fan sites will point you in the direction of my mistakes, but the essentials remain consistent from book to book because the story has been plotted for a long time and it is clear in my mind." So, I know that J.K. Rowling knows that these are, there is mistakes in her books. I'm not, I'm not trying to say, oh, why isn't this consistent from this book to this book? Like I said, I just want to have fun with this and poke a little fun at a series that I love and, really respect. So, I will point out the first entry from this Mistakes in the Harry Potter Books wiki. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. The beginning of the story takes place on a dull gray Tuesday, but in 1981, November 1st was on a Sunday. So I wanted to point that out just because that's kind of the same thing I'll be doing, just very small, things that slipped up or that don't fit and don't quite make sense. And I will be jumping from book to book. So if something gets said in the first book that kind of negates or is different from the same thing in a different book, that's kind of what I mean, what I'll be doing. I'll be focusing on the first book in the series, but that I will be jumping back and forth. So, if you for some reason haven't read the whole series, maybe I'll give it a little spoiler alert because I'll probably be talking about things that happen later throughout this series. Alright, and with all that being said, let's jump into my first question from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Sorcerer's Stone. Number 1, I wanted to ask about Dumbledore's watch that he pulls out at the end of the very first chapter. The passage from the text says, "Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands, but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and said, 'Hagrid's late. I suppose it was he who told you I'd be here, by the way.'" Now, I love this first chapter because it does a great job at putting us into the story and introducing Vernon Dursley and the rest of the Dursleys, because they are such a normal, just a stickler family for just being completely normal. And I love how at the end of the chapter just briefly get a glimpse of the magical world before, the whole story unfolds. And as most of us know, at the end of this chapter, Dumbledore is talking to Professor McGonagall, and he pulls out this watch. And I've always just been kind of fascinated by how this watch works, because it's the only watch, as far as I can remember from the series, that looks like this or functions like this. It's got 12 hands and little planets moving around the edge. So I just really want to know how it works. Like I said before, like a really small detail, but it's just something that I want to know. Next question I have comes from the next chapter. We're introduced to 10-year-old Harry, and he kind of recounts in his mind about funny things that have happened to him in the past. We know this as his wizardry coming out and showing itself, but he has no idea. And one of these things is that he was running away from Dudley and his gang, and he ends up on the roof of the school kitchens. And my question is, did Harry apparate at a very young age? Because if he did, that's like very serious magic for someone who's not trained to do, isn't it? Wizards don't learn to apparate until the 6th year, so I'm just wondering, is that what happened? Did he apparate? Did he teleport? Or did he just jump really high and end up on the roof of the kitchens? Because that just seems very advanced for an untrained and untrained wizard. I know that wizardry starts to manifest itself around the age of 6 or 7, but I don't really think that it comes out in great bursts like this, because it just seems like something very serious that would not happen before they are actually able to and trained to do so. The next question that I have is, do snakes know when someone can speak Parseltongue? Because in the exact same chapter as the previous question that I had, we follow Harry to the zoo with the Dursleys. They're in the reptile house, and Dudley wants the snake to move. It doesn't move. But then when Harry walks up to the glass, he's kind of staring at this boa constrictor, and it raises its head and winks at him. The passage is, "The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on a level with Harry's. It winked." And this is all happening through a sheet of glass in a reptile enclosure. So the snake is asleep, and suddenly Harry walks up, and the snake all of a sudden is aware that Harry is there. And not only is he aware that he's there, it seems that he already knows that he can speak to Harry. And I'm just wondering, is this snake a magical snake? Did it come from the magical world? Or do snakes just intuitively know that a person is around that can speak with them? It just seems odd that this snake would wake up and seem to know that it is speaking to Harry, who can speak Parseltongue. So I'm just wondering, do snakes just inherently know when someone can speak Parseltongue with a magical connection? Moving on from that, at the beginning of chapter 3, we read, "The escape of the Brazilian boa constrictor earned Harry his longest ever punishment. By the time he was allowed out of his cupboard again, the summer holidays had started, and Dudley had already broken his new cine camera, crashed his remote control airplane, and, first time on his racing bike, knocked down old Mrs. Figg as she crossed Privet Drive on her crutches." Now we, as the readers, if we have read further in the series, know that Mrs. Figg is connected with wizards because she is a squib. So if she is in contact with many wizards, I'm just wondering why she did not get help or get her leg fixed by a wizard. Having a broken leg is a very major inconvenience, and if she was connected with wizards, you'd think that she'd call someone up or have someone come and fix her leg for her. I mean, it might be that J.K. Rowling had not planned to have Mrs. Figg be involved with wizards at this early stage, but it just is funny to me that we know, if we've heard further, that she's connected with wizards, but she's just walking around on crutches with a broken leg. After that, the next question I have comes from chapter 5, Diagon Alley, and I have the same question a lot of people have, is how in the world does wizarding money work? I mean, I know that, like I said, a lot of people have this question with the 17 sickles to a galleon and 29 canuts to a sickle, but the question I have is, how do they place value on things? Because Harry spends 7 galleons on his wand, his magic wand that allows him to perform spells. Yet in the Half-Blood Prince book, when Harry talks about buying advanced potion making, a brand new copy costs 9 galleons. So I'm just wondering, how does a magic wand, cost only 7 while a textbook costs 9? Though I guess it might make a little bit of more sense when I think about how expensive college textbooks are. Anyway, later on in the same chapter, Harry meets Draco Malfoy, who says something to him about the game of Quidditch. And obviously Harry doesn't know anything about Quidditch, so he asks Hagrid about it. And Hagrid says, "It's our sport, wizard sport. It's like football in the Muggle world. Everyone follows Quidditch, played up in the air on broomsticks, and there's 4 balls. Sort of hard to explain the rules." And so my question is, how does Hagrid know about the game of football and that it is similar to Quidditch? Because earlier in the same chapter, we clearly see that Hagrid is fascinated by things that Muggles come up with to aid them in the absence of magic. So I want to know, how did Hagrid find out about football? Has he ever seen a match? Does he know the rules? Or does he just know that it's kind of similar in the fact that there's goalposts on either end and people kick a ball around? And I know that students may have been able to explain it to him, but it just doesn't seem something that Hagrid would be interested in because it's taught by Muggles. So I just want to know, how does Hagrid know about football and that it is similar to Quidditch? And obviously, if you're in America, I'm talking about the game of soccer. I know that football across the pond is called football. So, and I'm reading the British version, if you can't tell. Now, moving on to the chapter, The Journey from Platform 9 3/4. I actually have been listening to the books pretty much on a repeat while I've been at work. I listened to the Stephen Fry version of the audiobooks, which is the UK version. I know that people here in America usually listen to the version by Jim Dale, but I personally like the Stephen Fry version more. So that's what I've been listening to. And while listening to it in this chapter, when Harry is kind of eavesdropping on the Weasleys' conversation after he meets Fred and George, it describes Percy as having a silver badge on his chest, which we learn is a prefect badge.
The oldest boy came striding into sight. He had already changed into his billowing black Hogwarts robes, and Harry noticed a shiny silver badge on his chest with the letter P on it.
Now, I wrote this down because I knew from Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix that the prefect badge is red with a gold P on it. And so I wrote it down thinking that, oh, there's another little problem with the series, but now reading the actual book, I see that it is described as gold and red. So that was fixed. I just thought it was funny that in the audiobook it says silver. And just slightly after this, I have another question because Ron says something about a cousin of his mother's that I thought is pretty funny. It reads, "Are all your family wizards?" asked Harry, who found Ron just as interesting as Ron found him. Yes, I think so," said Ron. "I think Mum's got a second cousin who's an accountant, but we never talk about him." And after reading this, I thought it was pretty funny because Molly, before she married Arthur, was a Pruitt. She was Molly Pruitt. And Pruitt is a name on Harry Potter's list of Sacred 28 wizarding names. And I just feel like any cousin of Molly Weasley would be a wizard. So I'm just kind of curious, why is this wizard working as a Muggle accountant? Is he a squib? Is he still a fully trained wizard just working as an accountant? If so, why is he working in the Muggle world and not the magical world? I just for some reason, have a lot of questions about Molly's accountant cousin. And so at the end of this chapter, our main characters get their first good look at the castle of Hogwarts. And they take their customary first-year trip across the lake with Hagrid. And something very interesting I noticed when listening to it this time through. "Heads down," yelled Hagrid as the first boats reached the cliff. They all bent their heads, and the little boats carried them through a curtain of ivy which hid a wide opening in the cliff face. They were carried along a dark tunnel, which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle, until they reached a kind of underground harbor, where they clambered out onto rocks and pebbles. And later it says, "Then they clambered up a passageway in the rock after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last onto smooth, damp grass right in the shadow of the castle." And I never noticed this little detail whenever I read or listened to this before, but I just think it's a really cool place, like this little harbor underneath the castle. And I just wonder why the characters never visited this place again. It just seems like a cool place to visit, or like, a cool setting for something to happen. And it's just, they visited this once in the very first book, but they never go back to this little spot. And it's something very small and insignificant, but it just seems like a cool place to just go, just, to hang out or to study or just to, have something happen like a plot point. But they never go back to it and they never even mention it again. And I'm just like, why? You probably just noticed another edit where I switched shirts. That's because the previous clips were taking place at about 2 in the morning last night, and so it is the next day. So just to let you know why I'm suddenly in a different shirt. Moving on to my next question that I have, and that comes from the chapter The Sorting Hat. And during the sorting ceremony, Harry notices something, and he notices that sometimes, Harry noticed, the hat shouted out the house at once, but at others it took a little while to decide. Finnegan Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry in the line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. And this kind of goes along with an article on Pottermore in which J.K. Rowling describes what a hat stall is. And that is anytime the sorting hat takes longer than 5 minutes to decide which house it will place someone in. Now, the only two people that Harry knows personally that were actually hat stalls were Minerva McGonagall and Peter Pettigrew. McGonagall was considered to be in Ravenclaw before being placed in Gryffindor, and the Sorting Hat seriously considered putting Pettigrew in Slytherin before ultimately placing him in Gryffindor also. However, in this article on Pottermore, J.K. Rowling also says that in Harry's year there were almost 2 hat stalls, one of them being Hermione Granger and the other being Neville Longbottom. Now, in the book, we see and we could tell that this makes sense because it says, when Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When it finally shouted Gryffindor, Neville ran off still wearing it and had to jog back amid gales of laughter to give it to McDougal Morag. And now here we see that the book definitely goes along with the article on Pottermore, which says, in Neville's case, the hat was determined to place him in Gryffindor. Neville, intimidated by that house's reputation for bravery, requested a placing in Hufflepuff. Their silent wrangling resulted in triumph for the hat. But in that article on Pottermore, it also says that Hermione Granger was almost a hat stall. Of Harry Potter's contemporaries, Hermione Granger and Neville Longbottom came closest to being hat stalls. The Sorting Hat spent nearly 4 minutes trying to decide whether it should place Hermione in Ravenclaw or Gryffindor. And this kind of goes against what it says in the books. Well, not against, but it doesn't draw attention to it in the book. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Gryffindor, shouted the hat. Ron groaned. And that sticks out to me because in Neville's case, it clearly shows that he was on the stool for a long time, but with Hermione, it just seems like she sat down, put the hat on, and it called Gryffindor. So the Pottermore article says that it took nearly 4 minutes, which does not make sense with what is said in the book. If it took nearly 4 minutes for her to be decided on, then I feel like that's something that would have been noticed and noted in the book. And I know that some people do not consider Pottermore articles canon, but it is written by J.K. Rowling, so I kind of found it interesting. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. Moving on. Now, the next question that I have is something that I just recently noticed, and it is, why is Harry's Quidditch team so young? Now, we know that Harry is the youngest player to be chosen for a house team in a century, that Oliver Wood is a 5th year and is also the captain, and that Fred and George are in their 3rd year. I don't think we directly find out about the other 3 players' ages in the first book, but from later books we know that Angelina Johnson is in the same year as Fred and George, along with Alicia Spinett, and that Katie Bell is a year above Harry. So I'm just wondering why all these players are in the 5th year and younger. Harry is obviously in Gryffindor, and it seems like a very Gryffindor thing to want to show your talents on the Quidditch pitch, so I'm just wondering why the older students were not a part of the team. And I know that it is entirely possible that the people on the team are just really naturally gifted and that they can just have gotten on the team by pure skill alone, but it just interests me that there isn't a 6th or 7th year Gryffindor on the team because they would have much more time to practice, they would have been on the team for a while, but everyone on the team is between first and fifth year, which doesn't really make sense to me. That being said, I don't even think that we meet a 6th or 7th year Gryffindor in the first book. As a matter of fact, I know that we don't. It seems as though J.K. Rowling didn't want to involve too many names and too many characters, and she really wanted the members of Harry's Quidditch team to be important later, so having them in the 6th or 7th year would have meant that they would have graduated from Hogwarts earlier in the series, and therefore would not have been in the school for the later books. So it makes perfect sense if you think about it like that, but I just feel like having a 6th or 7th year on the team would be an advantage over having, say, a 1st or 2nd year student on the team. Moving on from that, I know that a lot of people laugh, and it is pretty much a joke at this point, how dangerous Hogwarts is when it is described as being the safest place in the world, but nowhere is it clearer how insanely dangerous Hogwarts is than when we find out that Fluffy is being kept behind a locked door on the 3rd floor. A door that is easily unlocked by Alohomora, the unlocking charm, and so it just makes sense that any student could and would unlock this door that they're told not to go into. So what my question is why didn't Dumbledore himself put an enchantment on the door or on the trapdoor leading down into the area that houses the Sorcerer's Stone and keep Fluffy on a deeper level in the school? You know, when it comes down to it, Fluffy is the last thing that Quirrell finds out about from Hagrid himself on how to get past. So it would make more sense to me to have Dumbledore put his protection first, because Quirrell would have a much harder time breaking an enchantment than he would getting past a 3-headed dog, in my opinion, because Dumbledore is such a powerful wizard. Like, I think it would be much more effective for Quirrell to have gone through all of these enchantments that the teachers have put to guard the stone, and then in the last room be met with a 3-headed dog that is very angry and very hungry. And I think that the story could have ended right then and there, because he would not have found out how to get past Fluffy, because he wouldn't have known about him. And I know that this is a big nitpick because Fluffy is such a cool and important part of the book, but if I was a teacher at Hogwarts, it would just lead me to really question Dumbledore's methods. And moving on from that leads me into my final question for this first Harry Potter book, which is, how powerful was Professor Quirrell? As a reader for most of the first book, we're supposed to see Quirrell as this bumbling, stuttering kind of mess of a person who is not very good at the subject that he teaches, which is Defense Against the Dark Arts. But in the final chapter, The Man with Two Faces, we find out that it was Professor Quirrell who was making all of these terrible things happen to Harry throughout the book, and that he also happens to have Lord Voldemort sticking out of the back of his head, which is kind of a big deal. But apart from that, while going through the book this most recent time, I noticed something pretty interesting. The fact that Quirrell uses a spell and ties Harry in ropes without the use of his wand. The text from the book says, Quirrell snapped his fingers. Ropes sprang out of thin air and wrapped themselves tightly around Harry. Now, from Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, we know that non-verbal spells are very difficult to successfully accomplish. And while we never find out about wandless magic in the books, if I could borrow from a Pottermore article entitled The Hardest Wizarding World Spells, in the section Non-Verbal Spells and Wandless Magic, we find out even harder than that, that being non-verbal spells, however, is wandless magic. To perform magic without a wand is beyond most wizards. As much like fire, magic can be raging, chaotic, and volatile. That's why wizards use wands to channel it, and requires the utmost skill and discipline to control. Wandless magic is like riding a bike with no hands during an earthquake. And so, going back to my question, how powerful is this guy? You know, we have this guy who very easily, it seems, pulls off a non-verbal wandless spell to tie Harry in ropes. The spell, by the way, being the Incarcerus spell, which we later see Remus Lupin use to tie up Peter Pettigrew, and Dolores Umbridge use on a group of centaurs to her doom. And also, according to the Harry Potter wiki, the spell is some of the most complex magic taught at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and is NEWT level. So here we have Quirrell using this NEWT level spell without saying anything and without the use of his wand. And we very rarely see anyone use his spells without their wand in the books. So I'm just wondering, how powerful is Quirrell if he is using these very complex spells without a wand? Now, some people may say that he was using some of Lord Voldemort's power because Lord Voldemort was possessing him at the time, but I really don't think that's how it works, and Quirrell himself says that Voldemort is not even strong enough to talk to Harry. So I don't think that Voldemort is strong enough to give some of his powers to Quirrell in his present state. And so it seems to me that Quirrell is much more powerful than people usually give him credit for. And it might be pretty lucky that he died when he did, because had Voldemort returned to power with Quirrell by his side as a faithful Death Eater, then it could have proved to be pretty bad news for Harry and the rest of the gang for Voldemort to have such a powerful wizard on his side. So that just about does it, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and if you liked it, hit like. I hope to do more of these videos. I want to do one for each book in the series. So hit subscribe, guys, if you want to see more videos like this, and until next time.